So unless you don't think that you have a skill advantage on this player, which would be extremely strange and would probably indicate that you should not be playing these stakes, then you need to 3-bet this hand. So in my mind, this is actually quite a large mistake to not get involved here. It's a very clear investment, and what you just shouldn't be doing is following pre-flop charts. Okay, I'm playing 3-bet or fold, 6s is a fold from this position, I fold. You need to look around, you need to open your eyes, you need to see what's actually up here, right? Big leak. Boys and girls, it's the return of your favourite show here at Carrot Corner. It's the return of Brutal Feedback. That's right. And one very brave student named Jake has decided to send in his session for review today. We're going to be going over his 100 Zoom video, and we're going to be shredding him to pieces. I am on holiday right now, so technically I'm meant to be in a good mood, but watching student sessions always gets me infuriated, right? Just like tearing students apart is just such a fun, cathartic thing to do in the middle of your holiday. So let's let him have it. Let's find Jake's mistakes. King Queen, okay, in the small blind. We have this on double speed. This guy's just tanking in the hijack for absolutely no reason. Okay, 3-bet with King Queen off. Good stuff. Face a 4-bet, a small 4-bet. We snap fold. I mean, yeah. Like, this is going to be a spot where our hand just gets completely devalued, even against the min sizing. It's just not really a hand that can do anything. I think it's fairly close to continue, actually, to flatting against that sizing, but probably not a big deal. Face another 4-bet. This one is definitely also on the edge, but call seems okay. With ace-jack suited, the kinds of hands you want to be flatting 4-bets with in these positions are typically suited broadways, pairs, low-suited connectors, ace-5 suited, live, stuff like that, avoiding like the offsuit Broadway region. Facing a bet on this flop, I think it's very important just to play only calls here. I don't think playing raises makes any sense whatsoever. Your opponent has a smidgen of 9x, but just a massive nut advantage in the form of having queens, kings, aces, whereas we have none of these hands. And why would our range ever crave raising in position if we have pocket jacks, which is basically the only value hand we can actually have here that's outflopped villain's range, apart from maybe some 10-9 suited if you want to make a fairly loose call. But in any case, there's really no reason at this stack to pot ratio to raise any of those hands, so just calling is definitely fine. And I would not build a raising range, as I say. I think it would be really weird to do so. It just wouldn't make much sense. So when we face a turn check at this sort of stack to pot ratio, and we have the board entirely locked up like this, in the sense that our opponent can't have two hearts, I think they're fairly unlikely to have two diamonds, both in theory and possibly even more so in practice in a spot like this. So I think what we should really be doing here is understanding that the urgency with which we could bet this spot is fairly low. Double flush draw does increase urgency, but the paired nature of the board does make it a bit more of a way ahead, way behind spot than it would be in an unpaired configuration. So I don't know, I think having a check here with this hand mixed in is totally fine. I think small betting this hand is totally fine. I don't actually love shove. I think shove is like the only line that's probably not good here. So as long as we check or bet small here, I think it's totally fine. If we do bet small, it's a fairly thin value bet, which we could make. But yeah, I think check is definitely by far the most normal play in this spot, and I would default to probably just checking. Like, your hand doesn't really gain much useful fold equity here. There's not a ton of live hands. And now on the river with this sort of holding, it's a weird spot because like I really don't think we're getting called here very often. I think things like kings, aces, ace, queen, king, queen are considering some form of bet here. We still have a lot of bluff catchery hands such as jack X, king jack, possibly things like 10s, 8s, 7s in our range on this node. So this is weird, and I don't expect to get called very often, but I guess we just rip it in and just hope that I don't think we're ever getting bluff caught by like the ace king region here ever. So we just have to pray that villain has some kind of queen that has decided to not value bet river, not block bet river, not shove, and just check call here and just jam. I think jam is the only play, and that's what we have to hope is happening. Or he's played an overpair kind of strangely and is going for this as well. But yeah, I think that spot is supposed to be folded very, very often in theory, and is probably overfolded in practice compared to how often it's meant to be folded in theory. It's a fallacy that villain is meant to defend his range in order to make our bluffs indifferent. That's a spot where our bluffs are meant to be massively winning, because our range is just doing really, really well compared to his on that action sequence in a 4-bet pot. Usually 4-bet pots are good for the raiser. That one is just fantastic for us, just the way the action goes down. Calling on the flop is just massively strengthening and defining of our own range, while it's not going to define villain's range very much at all. So really standard spot where we just need to bluff the river if we ever get there with anything with low showdown value, and definitely value shoving the flush and just hoping for the best, but expecting massive fold equity there. Not much we can do. 6s I think you can call or you can 3-bet. I would not fold here. This is pretty This is a pretty iffy fold. Like, the thing is, you've got a red tag, which I assume is just a recreational player with a short stack here. Now, the EV of getting involved in this hand with sixes in equilibrium, meaning in theory, is basically 0. What that means when you isolate the factor that this guy is a recreational player, and actually like 3-bet to isolate this player as well, use the word isolate in 2 different ways there. So when you just focus on the factor that this is a recreational player, you have a skill edge, they're going to be making mistakes, automatically I think call becomes winning. Does 3-bet also become winning? Probably yes, if you make it small enough. You could 3-bet to like 7 big blinds or 6.5 big blinds here with the intention of just isolating this opponent. And both of those lines are very likely to swing positive in EV because they would be break even against a table full of players of your skill level, right? So unless you don't think that you have a skill advantage on this player, which would be extremely strange and would probably indicate that you should not be playing these stakes, then you need to 3-bet this hand. So in my mind, this is actually quite a large mistake to not get involved here. It's a very clear investment, and what you just shouldn't be doing is following pre-flop charts. Okay, I'm playing 3-bet or fold, sixes is a fold from this position, I fold. You need to look around, you need to open your eyes, you need to see what's actually up here, right? Big leak, and a very common one that I'd imagine the student is actually suffering from in lots of pre-flop spots. Not a spot where you can get away with sloppiness because it comes up all the time, and actually if you're too robotic you will decimate your chances of maximizing your EV to its true potential. Sloppiness kills win rate, and that's what's happening in a spot like that. Ace-6 we open in the hijack, let's redeem ourselves, we go for a range bet. Range bet is definitely fine here. I'm guessing we're betting everything in our range just based on the timing. If we were splitting range, this combo could definitely bet or check, it wouldn't really matter, but would probably bet quite often with the spades and backdoor straight draws. Facing small raise here, our hand is already rendered like pretty indifferent. I actually think this is super cuspy. Like, once in a while, poker will just deal you a spot that is like right on the threshold between call and fold. I think this is probably a pitch, just because there's only one really large card here in this hand where we're doing okay, but I'm not sure you can just peel this. It does have some backdoors, but I think you want an immediate straight draw or a bit more showdown value, like something like ace-queen or ace-jack to peel here. Problem is you're just chopping too often with this hand. When you run into things like ace-5, ace-deuce, stuff like that, you end up chopping by the river, so it's just not as robust a bluff catcher as something with a bigger backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw, and more showdown value like ace-queen, which could possibly be peeled, but I don't think ace-6. Okay, it is cuspy though, it's not like a terrible peel, but I wouldn't make it. Jack 9-8, I would be playing plenty of checks on this board. I wouldn't be betting this flop at a high frequency. The reason being it's extremely equalizing. Like, it's not a board where you're going to retain a massive range advantage, as the cards are fairly large, like they're not a 7, a 5, and a 4. It's not going to be a disastrous board for you either, and what I would try to do here is just pick a global bet frequency for your range, which would be something like about 30%. I would guess 35-40%. With your hand, I think checking more than that makes a lot of sense. I think this hand is bordering on pure check, but can do a little bit of bet because it is the best kicker with the ace, so I'd probably bet this like 10-15% of the time and check the rest if I was trying to build a GTO strategy. Turn, you just have what we call a tier 4 hand in the Carrot Poker School, which is coming out on videos, by the way, if you're watching this in June, July, August of 2022, or maybe even the distant future, maybe you're watching in 2041. The Carrot Poker School is on sale on the website. It will be a timeless course. It will still be on sale in 2041, so I have no qualms about plugging for the future, unless online poker is like criminal activity that no one is allowed to do, in which case maybe we have to take it down. Other than that, it'll still be on there. Futuristic plug. So tier 4 in the Carrot Poker School means the tier of your hand that has to check because of its mediocrity. Basically, it's too good to bluff, too bad to value bet, doesn't gain enough for betting to be better than checking. In fact, quite the contrary, checking is better than betting with hands like this. So good check, river. I mean, I think it's still too thin. Block is this is either a value bet block or a check. You do block the other 9x in his range to some extent. That's calling 8x is the only other real bluff catcher. Maybe pocket pairs are meant to peel here against the block bet at equilibrium at some frequency. I think that will be overfolded. Like, I actually think the 6s through deuces region, or 7s through deuces region I should say, is overfolded here by pool to a block bet. So I probably just like check here and bluff catching. I think this will be a very overbluffed spot. You give them a little bit of rope here, I think they're going to overdo it. They just land here with way too much like king x, 5, 4, 6, 7, etc. sometimes, and then bluff. Villain had ace 9. No, we had ace 9. I didn't quite catch Villain's hand there. Ace 8. Okay, so he doesn't bluff with the pair of 8s. Obviously, that's one hand we could have gotten value from, but you can't just play against your opponent's hand. You have to play against their range, right? Otherwise, you're being a bit loopy. You can't just be like, oh god damn it, I missed value. He had ace 8. That's extreme tunnel vision. Be very wary if you ever catch yourself thinking like that. Not good. So far we're playing okay. I'm happy. No big mistakes apart from that sloppiness pre-flop, but that wasn't like a skill level problem. That wasn't Jake being like too bad of a poker player. It was Jake being careless, right? So don't be careless. Here we have another flat. And same in that spot in cutoff, right? You'd want to open your range up a lot wider than normal in this spot too, for the very same reason that your EV just simply goes up against a weaker player. So when you have this sort of control thing going on where in the theoretical landscape the hand is break even or whatever, this one isn't as massively winning, but any hand that's break-even becomes winning clearly as soon as you add a player to the table against whom you have a skill advantage, and don't add any that are like way better than you. But the thing is, your EV against weak players is going to be way, way higher than the stronger reg, the guy that's better than you, than his EV against you. Because like the person that's better than you, who's a reg, is only going to be better than you by like 1 or 2 BB per 100 usually, whereas a weaker player could be losing at 15 to 20 BB per 100 very easily. So that's where the real swings are, and that's why it's very important that you get involved against them. So King Jack, this is a little bit of a tight fold. Like you can definitely peel here as soon as you think that you're doing okay. Like it's very close. This hand is very close to a call in equilibrium and can also 4-bet. I'm going to just double check Jake's tags because he did send me a message on Discord letting me know what they are, so bear with me. Okay, so I can kind of get behind this fold because blue is indeed a nittier player, so kind of an exploitative looking fold there from Jake, which seems okay. This hand is like not going to be a call against someone that's not 3-betting enough. As long as we're assigning that tag based on good sample sizes, we aren't just like, oh, this guy's 18-16 over 40 hands, blue tag, nit. As long as we're not doing that, then it's definitely okay. Right, let's see if we can do some more brutalizing. This is called brutal feedback for a reason. We're meant to be being brutal here. So make more mistakes, Jake. Come on. This is called Jake's mistakes. We need more mistakes from Jake. Let's go. All right, small open. Ace 10. Let's do this. 10-8, 8-7-3. Okay, so globally speaking here, your range doesn't want to bet very often. Sizing wise, if you want to be a perfectionist, you probably want a big sizing. If you want to be like really theoretically like the solver. Could you use small bets here and bet slightly more often? Yes. Would I use small bets? No, I think it's counterintuitive to a good learning model, which would basically be like, hey, you have a massive nut advantage, your overpairs are thriving, the SPR is big, start piling more money in there. If you use a small bet on the swap texture, a lot of people don't know this, but what you're actually doing is placing a massive pressure on yourself later to use very big bets with the top of your range on clean runouts. So if you have a hand like jacks, queens, kings in this spot, and the runout comes deuce-deuce, and you have only bet small on the flop, you actually have to be like 3x potting river and stuff to not lose EV, because you're not getting raised often enough to compensate for what you would lose by picking too small of a sizing. Generally, in theory, the bigger you go, the more money you make if you want to test that out. Well, just imagine betting one big blind and getting called 99% of the time into a pot of 100 big blinds. You only make 99% of a big blind, whereas if you bet 100 big blinds into a pot of 100 big blinds, you're meant to get called half the time, and therefore you're going to make 50 BBs on top. So the bigger the sizing, the better, as long as you are not relying on getting raised for a big source of EV. If it's a spot where Velen's range is really polar and raising you a lot anyway, you can still go small. Little trick of the trade there. But if his range is more condensed and not raising you much, you need to start going bigger, which is why this bet's so good on this flop. This hand is not too big to bet, it's not the middle of your range. The middle of your range is something like ace-king of clubs here or something like that. That would be a hand that would become a pure check due to mediocrity. However, this hand is going to be doing a good amount of betting. This is actually a much closer spot when you get raised with this hand, because you now have better backdoors, you have nut backdoor straight draw, nut backdoor flush draw, and you have like more robust showdown value here. Your pair draws are better as well. So this one is a fine peel in my opinion. I don't mind calling ace 10 of diamonds here, but I do think it's fairly cuspy again. We decide to fold. We might be slightly overfolding there though after the big bet on the flop. I think it's totally fine. Had we small bet flop with that hand and been raised, I think we have a really easy call. Because our range is going to be less polar, it's going to be just generally more middling, and therefore we'll have to defend more of our middling hands to not be overfolding. That's not a spot where Velen is entitled to tons and tons of fold equity, because the spot is not better for his range than for ours. If that was the case, we would be hardly ever betting the flop, but we're betting at an okay frequency there. So yeah, we don't want to go overfolding our range massively there, and just be a little bit careful. It's on 2x speed, and I always want to be like, the student's snapping, he's not thinking enough, but then I'm playing the video on 2x, so it's hard to say if that's actually what's happening or not. Let's skip forward a little bit. Queen jack on the button here. Will we get the chance to do anything? No. Ace deuce of spades at the hijack. We open, we get 3-bet. Looks like a really easy fold. Not much to say about this one. Not going to be one of our 4-bets from that position. We're going to be a bit more selective about the caliber of our suited aces there, because our range is just quite tight. We don't need to be playing like really trashy hands on that note. So now we are actually scanning the table a bit with the 6-8 there. Did you see that? He's having a look around, but he didn't look around with the 6s, so a little bit of inconsistency there perhaps. 5s, we make the call. Very good board for range. I could just start donking range here. Like honestly, what will happen here in reality if you check is that your opponent's going to be like, oh, this board is terrible, I'm going to check back a ton. Or he's going to see bet too often and not know what the hell he's doing. I don't really know. But in any case, this is a board that is so good for your range. It's even better that it's rainbow, because here's the thing, guys, when the rank of the board is really good for your range, you don't want it to become two-tone or monotone. You don't want flushes to come and negate that and just spoil everything. You want to actually be capitalizing on the fact that you have way more straights, 2 pair of sets as a density of your range than your opponent does. And this is not about absolute combinations, it's about density, it's about concentration within the range. So I would go ahead and range lead here for 1/3 pot, or lead at a very high frequency. I think this is a very neglected part of the game where donk betting is actually such a thing and is probably just necessary in order to stop your opponent from maximizing by just checking back range. I really think if you don't build a donk bet range here, a solver will correctly just check back 100% of the time. Look at me approving the solver's play. I'm like, good solver. So I really like to see this. This is a really nice range lead. Really good stuff. So now we have to decide which part of our range we are actually at, because the point here is that we need to polarize on the turn if we're betting again. I think having some block bets and some overbets at this point makes a ton of sense when we're double barreling out of position. That's generally a fairly good thing to do, because you're going to have some hands like 8s, ace-7, queen x or something like that maybe wants to use a small sizing here, because villain's range of course does still contain overpairs and things like that. And then you're going to want to have like a much bigger sizing with your uncapped region, like your 7-6, your pocket 4s, your pocket 6s, your queen 7, stuff like this you could go bigger with. So I don't actually mind overbetting some of my value hands here and blocking other ones. 5s I think is too thin to block bet. I don't think you get to even bet 33% here, although it's probably not horrible to do so. So check seems pretty good, and just check call, sort of turn our hand into a bluff catcher at this moment. This seems completely fine. Do we want to like overbet here and continue just bluffing? I don't mind it. I think this could be considered a kind of hybrid hand. It has so many straight draws, it can definitely make a lot of better hands fold here by overbetting. So I think I'm torn between checking and overbetting here. I think for the block sizing, this hand is just slightly too weak. If I had a hand like 7-5, I would consider just blocking here because we move ahead of things like ace-6. But yeah, I think with pocket 5s, I would rather just overbet or check. We do go for the overbet. We've rolled a low number there. That's 7. Jake informed me is an aggressive number. That's the 7 here. An aggressive number on his RNG. And then on the river, it looks like we are loading up the shotgun here for a gigantic 3x pot overbet. What do I think about this? Well, let's see if he does it first. Are we going to pull the trigger? Are we going to do it? Boom. We pull the trigger and villain snap folds. Okay, what do I think about this play? I'd rather I didn't see the opponent's fold, because I like to give feedback in an unbiased way where possible here. But yeah, this is definitely fine in principle. Like if we have sets here, if we have straights here, we can definitely be jamming. And your opponent's range is very condensed. He's just called flop, not raised, called an overbet on turn. His range contains lots of bluff catchers, lots of one pair. Your range is really polar. So GTO kind of says go very large here if you want to maximize your revenue, because you're not going to get raised a ton by betting 2/3 pot. So if you imagine your opponent had a lot of like value raises and bluff raises against 2x pot, you could go against, sorry, 2/3 pot, you could go to a 2/3 pot or 3/4 pot, and you could still make back a bunch of the money you lose out by when your bet gets called. It's not such a big bet, but when you get raised, you can make back a lot of that money you miss out on by betting smaller when called. So you're kind of juggling this, right? You're kind of saying like, do I make more by allowing villain to raise me more often in this spot, or do I make more by just maxing out in the sizing and assuming I'm never getting raised? And I would assume here that you're basically never getting raised, like you're just getting bluff caught or you're getting a fold. So in a spot like this, your value region either wants to go really small because it's something like queen x or something like that. Maybe you have like ace queen, king queen that can kind of go smaller here, and you can have a sizing for those hands if you want to. And then your other sizing here should just be all in. And this is really good to see. I think bluffing with 5s is, I mean, the thing is with this hand, like how useful are these blockers? Not at all, right? It's not a useful hand to bluff with. And the problem with this hand is that your opponent never has a straight with a 5 in it. He has basically no 5-3 combos and no 8-5 suited combos in his range from cutoff. If this was button, your 5s are arguably a much better blocker. So being conscious of where your opponent's open from in the table and thus how relevant your blockers are is definitely a really important thing in spots like this. I think, however, that this spot is going to be tough for villain to hit the defense frequency here. We're going a little under 3x pot. So the fold equity we're going to need here is quite a lot. We're going to be looking at about 70 something percent fold equity required. You may hit that even though your blockers are bad. Why are your blockers bad? Because if there is something your opponent's folding here, it could be like ace 5 or king 5, right, that he's got to this spot with. However, you don't have the 5 of hearts, which is at least something because he's more likely to call turn with the 5 of hearts than other 5x. I still think that these are negative blockers overall. I think the spot's okay for your range, but it's nothing special, and probably what the solver will do here is try to find some bluffs that don't contain 2 5s. I also think another issue with this, potentially, theoretically, is that the hand, when you check here, there's some degree of checking down by villain with like the ace 4 of hearts, the 4 5 of hearts, something like that you're actually beating, and you get a little bit of pot share by checking. So I'd imagine that this play is not a thing in Equilibrium. I could be wrong, but I'd imagine this is just a pure check, and that your bluff should be coming from higher up there. However, like that said, this 10 is also quite a good card for your range because 8-9 does get there. It's definitely a hand that you have a lot on this node. It's a more concentrated part of your range than it is of your opponent's range. But the thing you want to block here in villain's range is 9-8, right? Because that's the straight that actually just got there. So I think it's much better to even bluff with some kind of, I don't know, hand like, it's hard to actually think what the bluffs are here, right? Like, how do we get here with the 9 that we're actually bluffing? I guess we have to have something like 10-9 or Jack-9 of hearts or something like that. Then we're going to block other folds. So yeah, I don't know. I'm going to guess this one's a check, but you do want to find a lot of bluffs here. I think your main bluffs here will be stuff that contain a 6 and a 4. You'll have some amount of like hybrid overbets on the turn, stuff like 8-6, stuff like that seems really good here, like 6-5 with only 1 5 blocker, and the blocker to sets, like that's really like the bulk of his nutted region here is like a set or 2 pair or something like that, 6-7, 7-6s. So I think having those kind of hybrid bets and following through with them on the river might even be better, even though they have technically more showdown value. They don't really against villain's range by much. So yeah, interesting spot. You know, I don't know, guys. You can look this one up in a solver and see what it bluffs here, but I just suspect that, like, yeah, I don't know. I'm a bit lost, but I suspect that, like, the bluffs might actually not be what you think they are here. Like, the 5s may not be as good a blocker as you would think. That said, it's very possible that humans are just folding their range more than 3/4 of the time there, and that play is just printing in practice. So I'm not really critiquing that play. I think it could be okay for sure, but do remember that, like, if we're just breaking even by bluffing there, then it's a losing proposition compared to checking, which is going to be plus EV to some extent, right? So a bit of a weird one, but I think with some showdown value there and fairly negative blockers, you probably check that one and find other bluffs. I'm just not exactly sure what they should be. But that's just a theory, right? We don't have to be robots. We don't have to copy the theory. So against a small bit here with 5s with a club, you can do some raising if you want, like you can consider it. And the reason is that your fold equity is very useful by check raising. Oh, sorry, we're in position, so we won't be doing any of that. God damn it, Pete, follow the action. So we just call in position. I think that's a bit more reasonable, not having many raises on this board. Like, you can have some, and they're just centered around Jack X, basically, but I wouldn't have a massive raising range here. 5s is still probably like a tiny frequency raise or something, but always calling this hand is undoubtedly fine. Turn, another really weird spot. We have some equity here with the pair plus draw. Generally, when you have bluff catchers with redraw and you're getting good pot odds like this, I'd imagine that this is a weaker player just from like the bet size here, although I don't know what green tag is. I think that's generally reg, but yeah, I think this gets really close against the sizing. With the club in your hand, I think calling is definitely fine. Raising here, like, I think we're probably overdoing it a little bit. Like, we don't have very many flush combos here. We have a few, like ace queen, ace 10, ace 5 of clubs maybe, and maybe some jack 10, queen jack of clubs combos as well. The jack not being a club does help your value range grow in size here, but I think you need to be kind of careful. You will have a little bit of nut flush draw to raise. Probably this sort of hand can do some raising. The 5 blocker is nice in that it blocks villain's value flushes, but doesn't block his bluffs. Villain isn't really... Maybe it does bluff with 5s with a club on this node, actually. It is very confusing, complex spots today. I feel like it's me that needs the brutal feedback trying to solve these spots. But yeah, the raise is probably okay at a frequency. I think it's very likely we're over bluffing here. I think to go for jam sizing here with this hand might be a little bit weird. We're just loving jamming the underpair with the club here. Again, it's another play that I feel like we may be overspending on that bluff. We don't have any nut blockers to like the good flushes or the flushes villain is gonna, well, we do block ace 5 of clubs, but I think having the ace of clubs there is like the main thing you want to be jamming with, having the ace of clubs, king of clubs. So you've got some king queen off, ace queen off combos that you can use there for that sizing. With the 5 of clubs, I might be more inclined to just pick the smaller bet. Like if you had a really bad flush there, would you jam? I don't actually think so. So I think you can have a smaller bet and a bigger one there, and I wouldn't put that into my jam. I definitely wouldn't jam with that holding. Again, I think we're definitely like bluffing a lot, which is probably going to work well against this pool. It's probably a good thing to do, but I do think also like we're kind of way over bluffing certain spots and potentially not using the right selection theoretically, which is not a huge deal. I just think it's something to be aware of. Like if you play this way against strong players that are really good at hand reading and they know that you've got a bit of fight to you, they will very quickly deem that you're over bluffing these spots where you have a very small value range, and they'll start calling you a lot and you can get crushed, right? So it's just something to be aware of. Okay, ace jack, what happened here? Go for a small open, UTG, get call from the button. Ace queen 10, very good board for range. Normally we want to be checking a lot in this configuration when we get cold called and we're out of position and our range is kind of struggling, but here the board is just a saving grace to our range. We can just go ahead and do a ton of betting. You can bet quarter pot, third pot. I just go something small here with range. The reason you want to go something small is that villain's range is actually really polarized to like smaller pairs that are just dead, and then hands that are just clearly like not going to be indifferent to a bigger bet either. So there aren't many hands you can make indifferent here in your opponent's range by going big, because you'll either have straight set two pair plus draw, flush draw, which is not indifferent to a bigger bet anyway, or you'll have something like eights that's not indifferent to a smaller bet. So there's really no way you can make any hands in your opponent's range very indifferent on this flop here by using either sizing strategy. If it was the case that this was like monotone and you could make like a random pair of tens or queens indifferent with the small bet, then I definitely prefer the small bet. If it was a board like, I don't know if I'd be betting this in this position, but like 9-8 deuce or something, then I would prefer a bigger bet because you get to make more pairs indifferent that way with a big bet. But here, I just don't think there's many hands you get to make indifferent either way. So whatever you're sizing here, I just go small based on the fact that we don't have a big nut advantage on this board. The king turn is really bizarre. What's happening here is that we kind of lose a lot of our range advantage on this card. Now, when there are three big clubs, it means that the guy with the more smaller clubs, which is probably this guy that's flatting, like, I'd imagine this red tag recreational player is flatting some suited connectors, things like that, ace-x suited, he's going to probably have quite a high flush density here now, probably more so than we will if you think about flushes as a total percentage of range. Therefore, I think our range is kind of struggling here also. We do have some jack-x combos, so I think having either a block bet here or a check is going to be okay. And the idea in theory is that this is a board where if you block, villain will be raising a lot of flushes and a lot of bluffs. He'll be turning like sevens with a club. He doesn't even have that. He'll be turning like some hand into a bluff. I think if you block bet here, this will be massively under bluffed, and it'll be a spot where villain just has masses of value raises in jack-x plus club or something like that. And you can probably just be like really timid against that in general. However, I don't really think I would like to play the nuts here with a block bet. Like, I just don't think I'm going to get, like, villain's going to capitalize on the fact that he has a lot of flushes and build this raising range very often. I don't think I'm going to do well with a small bet here if I have a flush. So the way I play this spot against a recreational is just consider like check raising my really good hands. I think that's a really good way to go, and just do a lot of checking in general and just ask him to tell me what he's got. So I just start with a check here and see what happens. Yeah, I really like this. Then on the river, now you can block bet, you can just make a really thin bet. I don't think you need to even like go massive here. Like, the thing is, he'll still have jack-x. When you go massive, you'll move his range a little bit towards jack-x. But however, you could go something like, I wouldn't go pot, I would probably go like a little bit smaller, because like the target region here is generally just two pair and like really bad hands like that on that texture. However, if your opponent's like stationing or whatever, there's nothing wrong with sizing bigger. We may have had that read, I don't know. 3-bet pots, blind versus blind, are tricky. We'll make this the last hand for now, and I'll probably do another installment of this video because it's a really nice bit of footage to go through. So the reason that blind versus blind 3-bet pots are really bizarre is just that you're dealing with a very polar range. Like, your range contains like all this rubbish stuff like jack-x suited and 10x suited and things like that. So you might look at ace queen 6 and be like, what, is that not a great board for range? Not really. Like, king jack-x, jack 10x, king 10x, these are much better. The queen is not the best Broadway. We don't have that much stuff that's polar to the queen pre-flop here. We have a little bit of bluffs that are polar to the queen, and we obviously have some value hands that contain the queen, but villain has a lot of queen x here. The ace is also like not a terrible card for small blind, who's going to be flatting like a bunch of ace-x suited and stuff to the 3-bet. We're going to be actually not 3-betting that much of our ace-x suited combos. We'll be flatting a lot of them pre. We will be 3-betting ace-x offsuit in this spot because we have a more polarized range, so that's okay. So the ace is kind of alright, like it's not an amazing Broadway. The queen is not an amazing Broadway. We have a lot of trash here that we wouldn't have like when we had a linear range like small blind versus button or something like that. So I think this is closer than you would think. I think you can build checks here, and if you're building checks on the flop, then jacks is definitely one of them. I think this is just a one street of value hand. I would check back turn. The reason I would do that is just give my opponent the chance to bluff river with nothing, or just define his range or make a silly little bet. Sometimes recreationals will just bet 5 big blinds on the river with like a pair of 7s or something, and we just get the call, or they'll just bluff. So I think check back turn, see what happens on river. If he snap checks river, you can maybe get super greedy here and just make a really small value bet. And I'd probably call here, the reason being you've just allowed your opponent's range to remain very wide, and weaker players will tend to overbluff notes like that. They'll just have too many gutters under pairs that are spewing that shouldn't be betting, that sort of thing. So love to see the call. Alright guys, we're going to wrap up there. It's been fun. This has been a very difficult session to review actually, like tons of tough spots for me to try and get my head around in real time. I think Jake played very well. I would say that the only thing that I would say is that he's probably over bluffing a lot of spots. Like he appears to be just selecting bluffs a little bit too loosely. So if he does move up and start playing like really tough players at 200, 500, that sort of thing, I want him to be aware that he could be exploited for this later. Like I definitely think he's over bluffing spots. I think at 100 though, it works very well. There's a lot of spots where people have to hit bluff catch frequencies with hands that are just not appetizing to bluff catch with, and I think it's going to be like really successful for now. But just be aware that what works at one stake won't necessarily work at the next one, and against better players. But overall, good job. Pay a bit more attention pre-flop. The only like EV loss I actually saw you make that's real life EV loss was folding 6s in a spot where you should just be playing them pre. But yeah, really solid session by Jake. Good stuff, good play, and we'll do another one of these soon. See you guys in the next video. Remember, carrotcorner.com for all of the stuff from me if you're watching this in the future. The Carrot Poker School will be out from June 2022 as a video course. Go ahead and pick it up over at the website. Please do like and subscribe. It means a lot to me. It really helps the channel grow, and I'll see you guys on another video very soon. This has been Pete Clark for Carrot Corner and Poker Education. See you guys next time. Bye for now.